Welcome to the Skeptic's Guide to Investing with Steve Davenport and Clem Miller. Every 2 weeks, Steve and Clem bring you brief investment insights you may not find anywhere else. We hope you enjoy today's episode. Here are Steve and Clem.
Welcome, everybody, to Skeptic's Guide to Investing with Steve Davenport and Clem Miller. Today, we're going to talk about probably the first of many episodes we'll be doing about the 2024 elections. And so jumping right in, it looks like just as of yesterday, both major candidates, President Biden and former President Trump, have clinched their respective nominations in terms of vote totals. And of course, they've been starting to lay out the details of their policy programs. And you know, there's obviously a lot of issues that are out there, both personal issues about the candidates as well as policy issues. So if you think about the personal issues, you know, obviously one issue that's out there is the advanced age of really both candidates. You have the various lawsuits and legal actions involving former President Trump. You've got the economy, which is improving, but inflation still remains somewhat high, and there's this sort of lagged impression that some of the higher levels of inflation are sort of persistent. And of course, interest rates are still high as well. Now, on the flip side of that, you've got an improving stock market, which helps some segments of the voter population. Another issue that's out there, obviously, is what's going on. Foreign policy issue is what's going on with Israel and Gaza, and you could add to that the various perceptions around, the Ukraine and Russia, or I should say Ukraine. Don't put the in front of Ukraine anymore. Russia and Ukraine, and the conflict there, and how much to provide, support to Ukraine in dealing with Russia. So I would say those are some of the major issues that the candidates have to face. A real question, for you, Steve, is which do you think among those issues or any others are the most important and will help decide the winner of the election in November?
I would say none of it, Clem. I would say the biggest thing that I would see is what's happening with this third-party candidate, Robert Kennedy. I think that his possibly choosing Jesse Ventura, the governor of Minneapolis, the former wrestler, or Aaron Rodgers, the quarterback for the Jets, is probably what people should be focused on. Because when we look at history, history tells us that these third-party candidates don't really have a chance to win, but they do have a big chance to influence the election. When we look at Ross Perot, who was able to get on the ballot in all 50 states, his election involvement really hurt Bush and allowed Clinton to win with 42% of the vote. And so when you think about these elections, and Ralph Nader was usually the candidate for the Green Party, and he would influence elections and take votes away from, Democratic candidates who would be not far enough left for him. But there were people who would show up who could have influenced the election by picking one or the other. A third-party candidate in an election that was as close as some of the last elections have been, 100,000 in this state, 50,000 in that state. Those votes going to somebody who is really a protest candidate or somebody who doesn't really fit the mainstream allow people who don't feel comfortable with either party to have an outlet. And I think it's one of those things that everybody's looking at the economy. Everybody's looking at the Fed. Everybody's looking at the things that you've mentioned in your introduction. And what I'm trying to say is maybe it's not what is in our headlights that's the problem. It's around the corner. There's going to be a deer that jumps out on the road and causes the accident. And you don't know when you go through this process. And what I'm trying to do is determine, is it real? Is his candidacy going to be dropped in 3 or 4 or 5, 6 months? Is he being put there and supported there by people from one side on the left or the right? I can't at this point determine who he really hurts, although I kind of get the feeling that since he is, the Kennedy name is very much associated with the Democrats, that he's going to pull votes from Biden. And so that to me makes him much more impactful, because I feel that that's something that, Biden's situation right now with the questions about his age and questions about his document handling. I don't like what's happening, but I also think there are many people out there who are unhappy with the two choices.
Yeah. I agree with you on that, Steve. The only thing I would say is I think he's going to pull some votes away from Trump as well. And the reason I say that is because, Trump has been making a big deal out of the fact that, the supposition that he solved the whole pandemic issue through the warp speed efforts to bring about the vaccines. He makes a big deal out of it. And whenever he talks about that, his supporters come down hard and say, "How can you say that? How can you say that? The vaccines were worse than than COVID itself," and so on and so forth. So there's a huge number of his supporters who actually oppose any notion that the vaccines were helpful, and those folks would be naturally attracted to Robert Kennedy Jr., especially if he were to keep talking about vaccines. I know he's trying to play it down a little bit, but if he goes back to talking about it, I do think there will be some percentage of the MAGA supporters who will go in the direction of Robert Kennedy. That's not to take away from your point, but about Democrats wanting to look for somebody new, but outside their party. But I think it's not as clear as
Sure.
as one might think.
I think the other thing that I want to come back to with what happened when Trump got elected is that Bernie Sanders had run a big campaign. He had really done a good job. And when you look at those Bernie Sanders votes, we're talking about the people who vote and winning the majority of those votes. But what about the people who stay home? My question is do people stay home from one side or the other and not like any of the candidates, and then leave it up to those ardent supporters? So I think that the biggest risk for Kennedy is getting on all the ballots. I was reading, and there's some information about how hard it is in places like Texas and California. In Texas, you need over 200,000 signatures from people who didn't vote in either primary, which is a very complex way to say, hey, this person is an independent candidate, and the people who didn't approach either or approve of either of the candidates have chosen him. And then in California, you need over 300,000, and there's some very strict rules about whether the document has been notarized properly, whether the document is consistent, whether the document and the voters have, identified their address and their voting address versus another address. And there's just a lot of legal and other hurdles before Kennedy can really get where he needs to have an impact in this. So I'm calling this out as an early, flash. There's something on the horizon that you should look at. Is it going to get bigger? Is it going to get smaller? Are there people on either side that are going to make it clear that he's not the right person? Sure. I think that not being a part of the debates will be the next hurdle. If he gets the signatures and he can't be on the debate stage, does that, make him irrelevant? My point is, in any election where it could be decided by 10,000, 20,000, or 50,000 votes in a given state, those 50,000 votes could be, the protest of picking Robert Kennedy.
We'll be right back.
We hope you're enjoying our episodes. If you are, then we'd greatly appreciate your liking, following, and sharing. Help us help others. Now let's get back to the discussion.
So you mentioned Jesse Ventura, Aaron Rodgers as potential VP candidates. I mean, historically, VP candidates really haven't mattered too much. They might matter because of the age of Biden and Trump, but will it really matter in the case of Robert Kennedy?
I think it's one of the strangest. If I were looking at this from his perspective, I would think I want to pick somebody who has political experience and somebody who has, an ability to show dependability and stability for a ticket that's from the third party. But then I look at it and say, what are we in? We're in the age of short videos and personalities. And in that case, I'd say that we really have to think about, well, personality matters, right? We all made fun of Ronald Reagan as being the actor. And then by the time people had finished making fun of him, he had already won.
Yeah.
So I think that picking some personalities is a unique way to go about this. Not necessarily what I would say is normal, but do we think this is normal times, or do we think this is kind of extraordinary times? I would say that being good on TV, being good in front of a camera, being able to raise people's excitement level is, I'm not sure this is the Mike Pence vice president choice. Yeah. And I think there's a reason why people are doing it, and because they want that personality. And I think we can disagree about the personalities and we can say we don't, but we're not probably the people who they're trying to attract. Who they're trying to attract are the people who are on the fringes, who are uncertain, probably might not vote anyway. But if they want to send a message to the two major parties, they'll be able to send a message.
Steve, so two questions. Why is Kennedy doing this? And would Kennedy have a shot at all if his name weren't Kennedy?
I think that one of the things that I find interesting is that the democracy in America is a two-party system. Everywhere else in the world where there are democracies, it's a multi-party system. There's a Labor Party, there's a far left party, there's a, the Democratic side gets divided into two or three different groups, even a pro-communism party in some countries. So there's all of these different choices, and they're much more driven by consensus management than they are party management. And here in the United States, it's felt to me that there is this third rail or this third voice that's just not being heard. So I don't think Kennedy has any chance of winning. The system is built against third parties. But what it does to me is it raises the question, why don't we have someone or somewhere who can, I really thought Bloomberg was going to get into the race the last two times. And he has the money, he has the resources. And I look at Kennedy and say, he's raised $50 million. It'll take 15 million to get on all the ballots. Maybe it inspires someone in the future. I don't feel like he's really going to make a difference in terms of winning this election. But the question is, does it lead us to a difference in terms of how we look at it going forward? And
yeah, I honestly, I would disagree with this notion that that we really only have two parties in the U.S. I think we have multiple parties, but they come under umbrellas of the Democratic and Republican parties. We've got the MAGA Republican party, right? The right wing of the Republicans, which obviously is gradually taking over that party, right?
I think there's a religious right that I'm not sure where they fit.
The religious right fits in there. Those who are more economic, economic populists, exist in both parties.
Right. I think I've always thought that it's the messy middle.
Yeah.
And the messy middle really doesn't fit into the category of I'm socially liberal, but I'm fiscally conservative.
And you mentioned those countries. You mentioned those countries that have multiple parties. I think one difference between the U.S. and some of the European parliamentary democracies is the fact that, really we're more top down. So we elect a president, and, the president, if he's a very popular president, gets a large amount of vote. Usually Congress, there'll be on the Congress front, there'll be more of his party elected. So the president pulls the party. In the parliamentary democracies, you have the parties elected, and then they choose their prime minister. So it's a different format. The only country in Europe that resembles the U.S. to some degree, and which kind of goes to your third party point, is France. And in France, you had a circumstance where Macron came out of the blue with his own party, which really was just his own personality, actually. And he built a party around that once he became president. So, that creates something of an analog for a third party run in the U.S.
I think personality politics has been a part of this, and I really don't know if Kennedy has the personality to really inspire people. I think it's, obviously his father and his grandfather, his family has inspired people in the past. But I guess I just wonder, when are we going to evolve our system? I agree it's a top-down system. I think we both agree that it has problems in implementation. And I'm not saying that having more parties would necessarily, I look at Italy and some of the governments there that are put together with, and Greece. I think there are strengths and weaknesses of both. And my reason for mainly bringing this up is that I just believe we are a very disjointed right now, and it's in chaos that things change. And I think that if we have a chaotic election, people might feel like, well, we've got to do something about, registering these third parties or setting them up. And it could just leave people or inspire people to do something different. And that's, whether it's idealistic or not, my belief is that something could change because of this. And I think that it's worth talking about and thinking about, because as politics will lead to more chaos or uncertainty, it leads to chaos or uncertainty in our markets, because people don't know, when one or the other is going to be benefited. So,
yeah, certainly a two-party system is a more stable configuration than a three-party system or a four-party system.
Correct. I think it is, but it also disenfranchises those people in the middle, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Because they tend to pull to different poles and to different personalities than what you're used to. So, I mean, a third party candidate, or let's just say a third candidate, if they've got a strong personality, certainly could pull some votes. And I think, Perot, I think, was one of those candidates. I don't think, honestly, I don't think Robert Kennedy is. If it weren't for the name, I think it wouldn't matter at all in my mind. If it weren't for the name, and if it weren't for the anti-vaccine positions, which I think pull more from Trump than from Biden, I think he wouldn't, it wouldn't matter, right, whether he's in there or not.
Sure.
But
It
but
might. It depends on the state. It depends on the elect.
yeah,
I mean, remember some of those votes that are going to go to the electoral college. When the states are proportional, right?
yeah,
If he wins, if he makes a difference in a few districts, and that state is not a winner take all state, then those votes that go towards one candidate or the other, or even a winner take all state. In a winner take all state, if he provides 100,000 votes that don't go to the person who you think should win, and he takes 80 from Trump and 20 from Biden, maybe that's the difference. And so I'm just saying that our system is very complicated, and adding a third party makes it more complicated. And so therefore, I don't think complexity necessarily leads to more stability.
right.
That's my point. It's
I
really
think,
not about the candidate, Clem, as much as it is a
yeah,
process in the election and
right,
how that might lead to people's portfolios having a little more uncertainty.
right. And I think you and I can both agree on the fact that it's still really early to be able to make some predictions.
Sure,
Um,
I'm not predicting he's going to be successful. I'm
yeah,
just saying
yeah, oh,
it's
yeah.
something on my radar
No,
that says,
no, it's too early to predict any future outcomes. I mean, I know that there's a lot of polling out there, and a lot of the polling right now says Trump. There's been some other polling that says Biden. It's really all over the place, this polling, and it's just too early. It really is
right.
too early to
And
to
and really
to
the polling, let's be honest, the polling is also not really indicative because the electoral college works the way the electoral college works.
yeah,
So I have yet to see a pollster say, here's the summation of every state and applied the electoral college rules to those states' delegates.
yeah,
Here's the total of delegates for each candidate.
yeah,
That's really what we need to do, right, Clem? I mean,
yeah,
this poll,
exactly. And
you're
you're right.
50,
I haven't seen. I've
if you're
seen some
43,
individual state
41, are
polls.
you the winner? Not
Yeah,
necessarily,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, I've seen some individual state polls, but I haven't seen what you're talking about, which is an aggregation and applying the framework of the electoral college.
Correct. And that's why I think that polls are nice, but they're not what you're going to wake up with on, the day after the election.
Yeah,
You're going to wake up with, he won this state and that state, and this poll was wrong in this state and this state, and that led to, you know, I mean, Biden was going
well,
to win Florida, and all of a sudden he didn't. And,
right.
so I
Well,
think
and the polls said Hillary Clinton,
yeah,
and I remember I was actually in London on the day of Brexit referendum, and I remember waking up the next morning and thinking, holy cow, how did this actually happen? Because the polls indicated that Brexit would be defeated by 2%. And it wasn't. And the polls, even the day before, the polls were just wrong.
right. I mean, I think it's a sample. I mean, from data statistics, I mean, a sample analysis, is going to have a plus or minus. And so all we're saying is people think about how these other issues are out there. And yeah, we'll have other chances to talk about the politics and the polls as we go forward. But I guess I just say um, it's an interesting time we live in, and you might say you like the idea of a Kennedy, or you don't like the idea, or you're just so sick of the two parties you're going to sit home. But this just gives another, bit of intrigue to what 2024 is going to be, which is a very interesting year. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And I appreciate all the support on the podcast.
Thanks
Thanks
very much, Steve.
The views shared on this podcast represent the personal investment views of the hosts. They are for educational purposes and not meant to be taken as investment advice. Listeners should consult their own investment, legal, and tax advisors. Past performance of any investments is not a guarantee for future return.